What's up, everybody? I thought we'd go through and look at some newspaper clippings from the newspapers at the time events were happening. It's interesting to see how it was presented to the American public, and it doesn't take long to see that they really favor some and others not so much. That's because our newspapers, as well as most of the countries in the Western world, were priority acquisitions for people with an agenda, and people didn't know it at the time. A lot of people still don't, but where today they openly push dissent, back then they had to be a little more sly about things. You'll see that one of the first things Mussolini did was take over a newspaper so he could communicate to other Italians. 1919, March 23rd, troubled by Italy's post-war problems, strikes, social unrest, and parliamentary disorganization, Benito Mussolini has organized a new movement. His Fasci di Combattimento will attempt to fight liberal Carlist influences through aggressive nationalism and rigid military discipline. So that's not a bad write-up for what today is essentially a curse word. And wait till you hear what they wrote a few years later after this. It's not what you would expect. An article sharing the same page in 1919. And just so you know, all of these isms popped up all around the world, the different forms of governance, because the, quote, revolutionary spirit, which I got a whole book on that we'll get to, but revolutionaries were toppling monarchy after monarchy. So this time frame was the end of the age of the kings, a system that's been around since the advent of writing. And I'm really not so sure that we're that much better off now. The world has become all about money, and it was seen as beneath a royal to sully his hands with financial affairs, which most of them delegated to people that really like to deal with money. And they essentially raised a monster that they couldn't put down. If our republic today was running as intended, then I would say no doubt it's a better system, but in practice, it's just produced an oligarchy. March 4th, 1919, an international Carlist organization with the goal of fostering world revolution has been established in Moscow. The Third International is expected to play a key role in Soviet foreign affairs. The Bolsh leader V. Lenin has argued that the security of the Russian regime depends upon its sparking revolutionary and therefore friendly regimes throughout Europe. Okay, spoiler alert if you've never heard anything about history for the last 100 years. And, well, unfortunately, there's probably a lot of people that haven't heard this. But since the beginning of this friendly revolution, about 27 million people were no longer available for the census, and only about 9 million of those were enlisted, while 19 million were just farmers and workers and peasants and the like. And these are fairly conservative numbers. I've heard as many as 60 million. But when twice as many civilians are, quote, removed from the census than soldiers actually going to battle, you've got a huge management problem. So I just wanted to clarify what they're saying is friendly here. And I realize this is only 1919, but that's a year into the Red Terror. So any honest journalistic integrity would have reported this much differently. It's not that they were ignorant, it's that they were in on it. And I know I keep showing this same clip here, but I'm really trying to drive that point home. The very next article below that is the one I'm really interested in, but let's do this trip to the moon real quick too. March 29th, a trip to the moon by rocket may someday be possible, according to a monograph published by Robert A. Goddard, a professor of physics at Clark University. Goddard has been experimenting with rockets since 1909 and demonstrated 3 models to the Army just before the armistice last year. Goddard's moon travel proposal is being ridiculed by newspapers, which have dubbed him the Moon Man. I guess 50 years later it didn't seem so ridiculous, and just 3 years after Star Trek was beamed into everybody's homes. I'm sure that's just a coincidence, though. March 21st, 1919. Not long ago, a revolutionary, friendly, I'm sure, named Bela Kun was in jail in Raskovia. Today, he heads a new government in Hungary. Kun leads a coalition of the Carlists and SDs who seized control of Budapest after the Count resigned to protest the Allies' decision to give Transylvania to Romania. In 1915, Kun was imprisoned, assumedly by the Tsar, but Dubulsh released him to be a commander in the Red Army and sent him to Hungary to be a propagandist. The plan worked. Kun wants a dictatorship of the proletariat in Hungary. Now, if you just imagine being somebody in 1919 reading this, then it sounds halfway like a good thing, right? The way they're reporting it. That was March 21st. April 22nd, the Hungarian Revolution may become one of the shortest on record. Just 1 month after Bela Kun took power, he's being forced out of office in Budapest. Reports from Hungary indicate that both the Czech and Romanian troops are fighting the Kun government. The capital is in chaos. Wait a minute, I thought these were friendly revolutionaries. Kun has failed to silence moderate elements in Budapest. Yesterday, the Associated Press reported his government tried to discipline the population by closing coffee houses and suspending telephone service because it is a bourgeois institution. But telephones aren't the real problem here. Kun is failing because he can't convince the peasants to become Bolsh. So the problem here isn't that a convict from the north has taken over. It's that the dumb peasants don't want that. And he just failed to silence the opposition, which probably means that they're still breathing. So you can tell that they're low-key supporting this and subtly trying to infer that this is a bad thing. They're just trying to modernize the world after all, you know? So this one kind of surprised me. Benito publishes his manifesto. I'm going to skip the first paragraph. Benito broke with the Italian Social Party after the outbreak of the war and formed a new newspaper, the Popolo d'Italia. Many of the people who read the paper are nationalistic war veterans, and they call themselves the Fasci di Combattimento. Now, Benito has published a manifesto for his followers. The manifesto demands the following: universal suffrage starting at 18 years and the right of women to vote. What? Outrageous. So that people have proportional representation. Autonomy for local governments. Autonomy means that each local government stands on its own footing. It runs all by itself. Something that is supposed to happen with every county in America under the Constitution. Popular referenda, the disbanding of the Senate and the political police force, and an end to secret diplomacy. So you can't make those backroom deals. And I understand somebody can say one thing and do something completely different, but we'll get to that. The creation of a purely defensive army, the confiscation of church property, that's Church of Rome, of course, it's in Italy. And by the way, separation of church and state was not to keep the state out of the classroom and Bible and all that. It was to keep the church out of the government because of the Jesuits. And so this is Italy we're talking about here, where the hive lies. Prohibition against speculation in the stock market. Every country got that stock market set up so that they could take control of all the industries. Retirement at age 55. An 8-hour workday. A minimum wage. And a progressive tax on capital that would rise to 85% on war profits. Okay, let me just quote every documentary ever made about Italia and Germania during this time frame. How did they brainwash so many people into being outright monsters? You know what? I'm not taking anything for granted anymore. I'm sure he probably did some bad things. Everybody does eventually at this level. But yeah, let's just look at a couple things here. These guys were thick as thieves in every parliament in Europe. And I already showed you what happened when their friendly revolution actually won. And the people that we're taught are tyrannical dictators are the people that expelled them from their parliament. So I Googled how many Italians did Benito off. I'm asking about his own people. How did he treat them? And they divert to the kinetic engagements with other people. So I found a thread here with somebody else asking the same question, and they say when I looked up his statistics, they all included the casualties from Ethiopia and Dub Dub Deuce. But that wasn't what I was asking. I was asking how many Italians did he go after? I read these college-educated answers all of the time, and they have never questioned a thing in their lives. They just gobble it up. And it's sad, but this guy answers, I'm not sure there's a figure, but he did use red rum and violins as a means to control Italian society. Oh, you mean like any country on earth, like that? And by saying, I'm not sure there's a figure, you mean there isn't one, because what? There were probably a couple hundred dissidents that were real troublemakers, like the handful you've listed here. Just shut up and understand he was bad, pleb. Ultimately, his attempts to control Italian society failed because the Carlists, the good guys, developed and grew. These factions would rise up in 1943 with the help of the US and Britain and all the allies. Funny how in both the Dub Dubs we helped out the Carlists. At which point this Italian puppet state also started deporting political enemies and actively or passively committing atrocities in Italy. Oh, so you mean they started rounding up all of the people that were actively committing a coup? You know, when I used to say that I think we've been taught everything backwards, I did mean that a little bit euphemistically, but I mean it literally now. We've been taught everything backwards. And as far as seizing church property, you know, I bag on Church of Rome quite a bit, but there are people in there that are legitimate, that believe in God, believe in Jesus. In my opinion, they're doing it all wrong with the praying to saints, but that's just my opinion. You guys know I'm a complete heretic anyway, but there are a lot of really good people in the church. Father Maulsley is a channel I got to share with you guys. I'll get to that in a second. But the church is a big machine. It's like a government, and there's good factions, there's bad factions. But you've got to understand the level of the game that these guys are playing at. I mean, think Yuri Bezmenov. The Kilo G Bravo raises children who are taught from birth that the rest of the world is bad and you have to help save it. So what we need you to do is to go into this organization and then report back to us. So they have literally gone out and embedded themselves in every position that they could get themselves in. And then once you're there, then you start bringing in you've got the keys now, bring in the whole crew. So this has happened to the church. This has happened to every university in America. It's happened to the newspapers. It's happened in the government. And they look, smell, taste just like everybody else. How can you combat something like that? That's the big question. I mean, this is on a level that people can't comprehend. So, speaking of the good ones in the church, I've started a couple new playlists. These are some good sources on actual facts about what happened here. And I believe his name is Father Maulsley, but the Scripture and Tradition channel here has a lot of good content, but I put the one in about the fumigation tents where he categorically shows it to be false. And I've also started another playlist for our friendly revolutionaries. I've only got a couple videos up on each one of these, but I'll just start adding to it as I go along. But yeah, you can get a lot out of some newspaper clippings from 1919, right? Hope you guys enjoyed it. I'll catch you on the next one. Static out.